Hello and welcome to a new podcast from the Belt and Road Institute in Sweden. My name is Hussein Askari. Today is Thursday, October the 10th, 2024. As you are all aware of, the world situation today has developed in a way where we have, on our hands, global conflicts developing. We have the situation in the Ukraine, where many experts and analysts are saying that could easily develop into a thermonuclear world war, which means the annihilation of the human race. This should not be taken so simply. We have at the same time the ongoing situation in West Asia, so-called Middle East, with the ongoing assault by Israel on the Palestinian people, which many people describe as a genocidal war, and also in Lebanon. And now we have Iran involved into that situation. And also this could develop into a larger global conflict. So all these things are happening in a certain context. We have a tension in the world. We have all kinds of problems, but also from our standpoint is happening in a situation where diplomacy and dialogue have almost been thrown out of the window in the interaction between the major powers. We have the tension between China and the EU. We have tension between China and the United States. Some people are trying to foment. It has many different. It's not a conflict yet, but it is building up. We have new tariffs, part of a new trade war, new tariffs imposed on Chinese products. We have harassment of Chinese citizens, scholars, scientists, and business people working in Europe and the United States. So there are many different levels of this tension, which are not helpful to resolve the situation we are facing as a humanity in the world. From our standpoint, in the Belt and Road Institute, our mission is to build bridges between nations, to promote economic development, economic cooperation as the only and best method for establishing peace and security in the world. But there is also needs to be a mutual understanding of the goals of humanity. And therefore, months ago, we started a project, myself and my colleague, Stephen Brower, which I will introduce soon, to dig deeper into the mindset and thinking and philosophy in both the East and the West. Of course, we have other cultures, we have other civilizations in between, like the Islamic civilization and other Asian and African and American civilization. But our focus is on these two poles right now, which are pulling the strings on this tense situation. So we are attempting to dig deeper into where do we find mutual understanding of the mindset and also agreement on the nature of human beings, the essence of the existence of human beings, human society, and our relationship to nature in both these cultures and the other cultures, of course. Let me introduce my colleague first, Stephen Brower. Welcome, Stephen.
Thank you, Hussein, Mr. Askari. It's a pleasure to be with you and continue this discussion, which I think is very important to help people understand how we can go further with cooperation around the idea of the Belt and Road Initiative and avoid the kinds of dangerous conflicts which you have already outlined.
Yeah, in our last discussion, we came to an agreement that there are common features in the philosophical outlook in Europe and China that are almost, they're not identical, but they're very close. But these are not random. It's specifically focused on the work of the philosopher and scientist Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz, his philosophical mind, ideas, but also his attempt to understand the Confucian Chinese philosophy much deeper. Of course, he had his mediators, which we're going to discuss today. But the question is, for today, are there universal values? Is there something we can call universal? Can we have universal values when we have diverse cultures, diverse civilizations? Can we have harmony among nations today, nations who have different political, cultural, and social systems and different ways of development? Are these things possible? And I think this is it's a very good a better place to start with is, as we said, we have the Belt and Road Initiative, which we have been working on. But President Xi Jinping launched the Global Civilization Initiative 2 years ago to answer some of these questions. Can we have harmony within diversity? What are the criteria for mutual understanding among nations? And therefore, it's like very important to come to the bottom of these things. Of course, we are not claiming that we have understood all European philosophical aspects of thinking, nor the Chinese side, but what we are trying to bring here is the bridge. So if there are mutual principles that both all cultures and civilization understand, agree on in a certain way, but what is the method of establishing these bridges? How do we do that in the tense world situation today? So I would like to ask you first, Stephen, your view of how does the Global Civilization Initiative contribute to that, the role of the Belt and Road Initiative in building security, peace, and mutual understanding through economic development?
Yeah, well, thank you for that question. I think the first point is that the Belt and Road Initiative is a global initiative that we have underlined. It is originated out of the leadership of China in the present period with President Xi Jinping. But as I have said often, I think it has a much more deep-rooted aspect of Chinese civilization, which is what makes it quite unique. But it is the pathway to how one can work together, certainly on the crucial economic questions that are facing the world in terms of eliminating global poverty and doing it through modernization and infrastructure. That's the objective. That's what we work for, as understanding what the importance of the Belt and Road Initiative is coming out of the leadership in China. Now, the question is, in order to actualize that, there is a necessity for, as you outlined, dialogue between East and West, between Europe and China especially, in order to accomplish what has previously been an objective of the thinkers that you referred to in the period of the 16 and 1700s, or even slightly earlier in the middle of the 1500s, which had that very objective at that time of how to build a bridge between European and Asian culture, at that time China. This is a profound investigation of ideas that are generally not openly discussed. And in my view, they're crucial in order to understand the foundation for how we can build not only cooperation on the economic front, but on the more profound basis, trust and friendship, which is the objective that was taken up by a certain faction of the Jesuits in this period that we're going to investigate.
Yeah, it's important you point to the question of, dialogue, which means that you have a two-way communication between two speakers and two listeners. What we have been used to, especially since the fall of the Soviet Union in the 1990s and the thesis of the end of history, that there's only one political system here, which will dominate the world, which is the Western liberal system. And since then, we have had some sort of a monologue where Western powers are the speaker and everybody else is the listener. That we have the best system, we have the best culture, we have the best technology, We are democracies, we are civilized, and everybody else should listen to us. Many Westerners, even people who lived and worked in China, are frustrated with China and the Chinese, and the fact that China has risen and is assuming its right position in the world as both a powerful country, but also as an economy, but also as a culture. Is that our view is that we are the best, this brings us back, actually, it's similar to the situation we had with the age of exploration, where Europeans came to the Americas, but also to East Asia, with the idea that they are going to dominate because we are a superior culture. And then we had, of course, this clash later with China. But China was already a powerful nation, it's a rich nation. But this is the context. This is really, it's still quite similar to today, what the European imperialist mindset was at that time. But some people, as you say, were trying to break that pattern of dialogue, having a true dialogue with the Chinese, not to impose so-called Western values and culture and interest on them.
That's very true. The point is, number one, that looking at these ideas of history is not just some interesting academic exercise that has maybe it's useful to study and know, but for our purposes, it's a fundamental question of how we can actually change what is the kind of one-sided monologue, which is tied to an idea of imperialism. It's tied to the idea that not only should everyone follow their values, their objectives and objectives are based on a very degraded view of what a human being and what the nature of human beings are. And this is why you had, for example, colonists from Portugal, from Spain, from other European countries, even at the time we're looking at in the 15 and 1600s, who were more or less interested not only in exploiting resources for colonial purposes, but for imposing the idea that in order to be the strongest and the best, what does that impose? It means you have to dominate. It means you cannot have or allow other human beings or cultures to freely develop and exchange the positive basis upon which one can cooperate and ultimately build friendship and trust.
Exactly. That's where we have some of the big problems, is this fear of China and distrust of China, because we are not open for a dialogue to really understand China. Now, in the last time we discussed the role played by certain missionaries, Jesuit missionaries like Matteo Ricci, who, by the way, he came to China through Macau, which was a Portuguese colony at the time in the 1557 already it became. And from there, Matteo Ricci went to Guangdong in China and then continued until his death. By the way, it's just to emphasize how important he is for the Chinese. Just would like to mention the fact that in 1999, China built the Millennium Monument in Beijing, a large monument. And there are all kinds of thinkers of the last 1,000 years before this millennium. And there are only two Westerners there's a fresco of the great thinkers and scientists and artists of the past, the first century. And there are only two Westerners. One is Marco Polo, who, according to them, introduced China to the world. But also they have Matteo Ricci, who introduced the world to China, the West to China, and established a fantastic relationship to the Chinese. So until this day, he's considered one of the greatest Western figures in the world. So people, when they visit Beijing at the monument, they can see he is represented there. What was so important about him?
Well, there was a major philosophical fight that was ongoing in Europe during the so-called time of the Reformation or the Counter-Reformation, that also took the form of those who were fundamentally philosophically aligned with Plato, which was a Renaissance concept of the European thinkers based on the introduction of Plato's ideas into Europe. And this faction, which was deployed into China at that time through Matteo Ricci, was actually directly connected to this Renaissance concept, the investigation of mathematics, of philosophy, of astronomy. The teacher of Matteo Ricci, who was perhaps the key person in this process of exchange, was an actual friend of Johannes Kepler, who was by all means, the founder of modern science and astronomy in discovering the actual ordering of the solar system. This faction that Matteo Ricci ultimately defined as what was called the accommodation faction did not wish to impose their ideas, but to win the hearts of the Chinese to what they believed is the most important part of religious beliefs within the Christian or Catholic Church. But their approach was entirely different. And the most important thing when one understands is I've identified that in the world today, we are suffering, especially in the West, of a extremely superficial looking or way of seeing events without thinking about the deeper causality that is behind not only what people do, but why they do it. And that deeper understanding was the faction within the Jesuit missionaries that Matteo Ricci was a part of. He actually mastered in Macau, according to one of the leaders, Velegnano, a Catholic leader of the group that Matteo Ricci belonged to in Macau, that before they would enter China, they had to master the Chinese language. Because if you don't know how to communicate and speak, then you will not be able to properly engage in any kind of discussion or dialogue. So this was one of the key things that was done. And in the case of Matteo Ricci, his mastering of Chinese was on a level of a very profound philosophical capability, which allowed him to speak and communicate and work throughout his time in China with the leading philosophical thinkers in China itself. And at one point in his life, there is many ironies to his life, because he spent, after he arrived in Macau in 1583, he spent the rest of his life in China until he died. And he has even written in one of his known letters that has been preserved, "I have become a Chinese." That is, he became so deeply immersed in understanding and communicating with China as the Chinese people think, that he himself felt that he had almost become in his own thinking, which is an example of the kind of deep understanding and friendship that we should be striving for.
Yeah, this question of friendship is interesting, because this has become it's a norm in China. I mean, if you want to have any even in business, you have to have friendship to establish a certain kind of friendship. Unfortunately, our view of things here in the West is like it's a bit more pragmatic and formalistic. We would like to do business, but we don't want to be friends. This is what they are saying now about China. Is that okay? We do want to have business, but we are not really friends. We can't be friends. They say at the best we are partners, but we are also competitors and now even rivals. This is how the EU views China. So this idea of building friendship, mutual trust, is out of the mind of the, at least the leadership we have in the EU and even in the United States, that you can actually, other human beings can be your friends, not simply pragmatically being doing business with them for some material thing. And I think this is very important. What was it that Ricci discovered in China which made him so impressed with the Chinese culture?
Well, I think this.
I mean, what did he bring to the Chinese? Because why do they respect him so much? It's not only because he admires the Chinese, they like him, but he also brought things from Europe, from the European civilization to the Chinese culture.
No, that's true. He was a very highly well-educated thinker in this Renaissance culture of science, of mathematics, which was part of the nature of the Jesuit mission, that it is through teaching and learning that they will be able to promote their religious views among other civilizations. And he brought the knowledge of science, of astronomy, which was impressive for the Chinese leadership. And they responded to his both his character as a human being, but also as somebody who was facilitating knowledge coming from Europe, which they did not have. Now, it's very important to understand a certain thing about when we talk about these universal values between East and West, or between Europe and China. The Chinese, especially through this is not only limited to Confucian thinking, but through Confucian thinking, and especially his follower, Mencius, which is a very big part of the Chinese classics and a very orthodox developer, Mencius, of Confucius, that the fundamental nature of the human being is good, that human beings fundamentally are good, that their spirit can be engaged, that is, their minds can be engaged in productive exchanges, because human beings are not beasts, they're not animals. Now, this is the complete opposite view of imperial thinking, which is unfortunately dominating Western thinking and power structures right now, which is based on a completely opposite view, that human nature, for them, is fundamentally bestial and based on the idea of dominance. That is, if you behave or think that human beings are simply animals, then you have the vision that you will control through power and brute force. And
yeah, that's called the Realpolitik by Kissinger, Graham Allison, and even Antony Blinken, U.S. State Secretary. He recently said that in international politics, you are either at the table or on the menu. So
exactly,
you either eat others or you will be eaten.
Yes. Now, this is based on the inherent idea that human beings are basically egotistical. They're basically selfish. This is a Hobbesian view. Thomas Hobbes was an instrumental thinker, philosophical thinker, in founding the British Empire, approximately during this time. And this imperial idea degrades human beings to the level of beasts. That's what we're seeing in terms of the kind of crises that certainly is going on in West Asia with the role of the government right now of Israel, in which their idea of imposing and gaining what their objectives are through brute force. The idea of using and maintaining, and they themselves, as imperialists, are become bestial by nature. And that's what is really one of the keys of how this problem has to be addressed, because if we are truly human beings in the sense of what distinguishes us from the beast, which makes us creative, which makes us innovative, which is very much part of Confucian culture and Chinese culture. And this is something that should be embraced by the West as a form of cooperation, not to abandon what has been good in the history of Western Europe, but rather to eliminate this kind of arrogance of imperialism, which is based on the idea that human beings are basically evil or selfish.
Yeah, that's exactly what the liberal economic system is about. Adam Smith says, that the basic motive for humans to do anything in the economy is to seek pleasure for themselves and avoid pain. That's the goal of existence. All these things you are talking about, Stephen, about being good, about the common good, about friendship, about love, these are things that we let God decide. We humans don't possess these qualities. And I think this is also very important in terms of not only the Belt and Road Initiative, but the Global Development Initiative, whose basic principles is to eliminate poverty, not only in China, but in the whole world, as to raise the living standards of people and initiate economic development and economic cooperation as a way of establishing peace, because that way you create mutual trust among nations, among people, although they're different in cultural background, political systems, social systems, and norms, but there are common goals that the human race can embrace. But as you say, unless we get rid of this bestial mentality, which has unfortunately been part of most cultures or every culture at different times, but to reach the point where that universal does not mean the rules-based order, that whatever we think is right should be universal. That's not what universal means. Universal means what is the true character and nature of human beings, as you discussed here, is we can agree upon that humans are good. They exist to do something good, to use their creative capacity to discover things and improve life on Earth, but even improve nature around us. And I think this is where the conflict is, in understanding what the essence of human nature is, which is still, and I think this is something we have discussed previously, but also, I mean, our friends in China tend to not pay attention to this conflict within Western civilization, within Western culture. And therefore, it's very important we are not only talking to people in the West to understand China, we are also talking to people in China to understand the true character of what, how Europe and how the United States itself, we discussed last time, how the United States itself did develop as a republic out of the imperialist British Empire.
That's a very important point. Look, the idea that that this group around Matteo Ricci, which then leads into Leibniz, Leibniz had this very fundamental idea that not alone are human beings basically good because they have a certain divine spark, which is what creative. This is not just let's agree on. This is something that is inherent to every human being, no matter what culture you might come from. And that is the organic nature of what distinguishes human beings from the beasts. Now, when that is not cultivated, the point of what Mencius and Confucius say is then you degenerate into a bestial characteristic. The United States has a great history that was founded on not alone Leibniz, but a thinking that reflected this kind of Renaissance thinking. Now, your point is very correct that it is important for what we can do to facilitate in terms of creating this kind of actual more profound dialogue, that we identify the nature of how Western civilization, European civilization, was a war, a fight between a faction that stood for a Renaissance idea of man and human beings that were good in the image of a creator, and those who represented an outright bestial imperial viewpoint. That is still on the table right now. And to the degree that we promote this kind of integrated discussion among thinkers in China and in Europe, that is how we can identify the causality and, in my view, overcome the kind of thinking that is leading the world dangerously to its own self-destruction in the form of a potential global war or even nuclear war.
Yeah, I think this is very important on the question, you raise on the human mind, because I mean, what Matteo Ricci represented is what Schiller calls the aesthetical education of the soul. Because what he brought with him, what he impressed the Chinese with, and what he learned from the Chinese, these questions pertaining to music, art, astronomy, science, and morality, ethics, in a sense. And that this aesthetical development of the individual, as humans being good, not only being good, but being also creative, that we are endowed with certain capabilities that we can develop forever. But we need an aesthetical education system to develop the mind of every individual in society. And I think this is also a big question, both in the West, but also in China. I think there's a lot of emphasis now in China in the leadership on the question of aesthetics and aesthetical education and understanding, going away from the banality of modern culture to the profoundness of the classical culture in poetry, music, art, and philosophy. And I think there is a big move in China, at least from the leadership side, to promote that, which we are actually losing here, because we have a fantastic cultural tradition in the West, not speaking about, now many people might say we are Eurocentric, but there is the great developments in Europe. Actually, there are contributions not only from China and India, but also from the Arab and Islamic world into Europe. But as I said, being in these two poles right now, so we have forgotten about the enormous beauty which was created in Europe, which was also part of the development of the European civilization and culture before industrialization. So these things are being mixed up, and the emphasis is put on the imperialist faction, which dominated the world. Unfortunately, today it dominates the world. It does not allow people to think in terms of what is good, because what we see around us, as you said, is bestiality. Those who run things mostly are with this bestial mindset that only force can achieve your goals. And I think this is a very, very dangerous proposition. So anyway, I think we have set the stage now for further discussions, because many people today are now curious to learn more about Matteo Ricci, but also his dialogue partners, because he had dialogue partners in China who also wrote things, who did things, philosophers and scientists who are actually placed next to him in the fresco of the Beijing Millennium Monument. So I think we need to dig deeper into that and bring more of the pearls of this dialogue, which was going on between Matteo Ricci and his interlocutors in China, but also then why he did not succeed, so to speak, or his followers did not succeed in pursuing that dialogue. Because as we discussed last time, the Vatican, the Pope, he shut down this faction, which is accommodating to Chinese, and ended that dialogue like almost less than a century after Matteo Ricci died. But also the Chinese locked out these missionaries because they were told, the Chinese were told, you either accept our way or it's the highway. So the Chinese said, no, we don't accept your way.
I think we have to emphasize this discussion and dialogue that we're engaged in is a preliminary follow-up to the original one, but there will be many in continuations of it, because we are actually laying a framework for how to overcome what is presently the ruling thought process in the West that is destructive. And how can we actually, in the context of the Global Civilization Initiative, establish the foundation for friendship and trust? That is a great challenge, but look, China is a very complex civilization. It did not just come into existence with the People's Republic of China. This is an important, very important date for China and for the Chinese civilization. But the thought processes that define the thinking of China are not simply a matter of the political view of socialism. This is why the ideas of Confucius have played and still play a major role in the historical and educational process that is ongoing in China. And when you investigate these historical connections, like in the United States, if you look at how the United States is being run and has been run effectively since the Second World War, it has been functioning as a satrap, an underling for imperial policy, which is primarily based out of London in connection with U.S. involvement. Now, that is not the only basis for the historical notion of a true republic, which is how the United States was actually created. So we are talking about recapturing a historical process now in the present that will begin to resonate in discussions that will discredit the kind of mindset that is still imperial and arrogant. Because if we don't, that only leads into the grave for human existence. And that obviously is not something we can accept in terms of recognizing as I was outlining before, the actual true beauty of human society and the human mind, which is a part of how the universe has been created and still should be the basis upon how we continue our journey into the future based on this kind of cooperation and friendship.
Very good. You have a very serious situation, but also you have enormous potential to do the good and change things into a positive direction. Thank you, Stephen, for being with me today. And we promise you to follow up this discussion with further and more detailed discussions of this dialogue between the East and West. Thank you for being here. And remember to watch the previous dialogue we had on this matter, which I will link in the description of this video. Thank you very much.